Good evening. This is Brittany with Liberty Beats. And tonight we've got an explosive scandal out of the Department of Justice involving the Epstein files. When they released the 3 million document dump on Friday that we've all been waiting for and we all really want, yes, that was a good thing, except for one problematic area. The DOJ decided they wanted to disseminate child pornography because they figured out how to redact everything they're not allowed to. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, let's jump into this. For just a really quick recap for context, Epstein obviously is the infamous financier who was in awaiting trial, but had been convicted in Florida for sex trafficking minors. The bipartisan bill that passed in Congress was an overwhelming majority, and it mandated the Department of Justice to release millions and millions of pages from the Epstein's investigations by December 19th of 2025. Well, as you know, they still haven't done that. They dropped a handful of stuff we'd already seen, and now they're playing games. And we know they're doing this because that's what Donald Trump wants them to do. And that's where we enter into the Epstein Transparency Act. That was signed into law by President Trump in November of 2025, and it allowed redactions only for protecting victims' identities, ongoing investigations, or national security. That's it. However, that's not what's happening. Trump actually touted this bill as a win for accountability, saying it would expose the truth without mercy. However, all that's been happening since November is the DOJ and Trump have been trying to cover this up. Here's the key. It makes it illegal to over-redact non-victim information. So you can't hide details about powerful people. You can't use embarrassment as a reason to redact. They must be minimal and justified, and they have to justify those redactions to Congress. Well, as you see, the DOJ is still not handling that correct. There is still 3 million, maybe more, documents in their possession, and Todd Blanche is trying to say they're done, but they wouldn't be. And so the DOJ has turned this entire Epstein document situation into a major fiasco. So now, this is, we have to consider this just isn't sloppy paperwork. They're playing favorites and they're doing the Trump administration's bidding to keep him hidden. At this point, I am having a hard time that what he is allegedly guilty of, that he isn't actually guilty of. I don't know that for sure, so I can't say that. But I've never seen anybody fight so hard to not be able to prove their innocence if he was innocent. Now let's break down the releases. December of 2025, continuing into January of this year, they've dropped about 3.5 billion pages, including 2,000 videos and 180,000 images. They claim this fulfilled the Transparency Act, but but the survivors are attorneys and almost every journalist out there, mainstream or independent, we're calling foul. First, some of the files that were just released did reveal Epstein's ties to people like Bill Clinton, Elon Musk, Donald Trump, but that's not surprising. We already knew that. But it did tie Melania Trump more into that inner circle and closer to Ghislaine than she's ever admitted. There are victims as young as 14 describing assaults at Epstein's Palm Beach mansion. There is even a 96 FBI report accusing Epstein of child pornography threats. But now this is where it's going to get really dark, and it should potentially be criminal, because if you and I did it by accident, there would be no mercy, is my point. So multiple reports, and I did see them, and I saved them just so in the future the DOJ can't lie, because they're good at that. We can confirm that victims' names, photos, identifying info were left unredacted. ABC News has verified instances where survivors' full names appeared, including women never publicly linked to the case. And one X post even alleged the file included naked pictures of young girls with their full name, address, and phone numbers exposed. And I am here to verify that that did in fact happen. Attorneys for the hundreds of Epstein victims have totally slammed the DOJ. For their thousands of redaction failures, they have no problem redacting Donald Trump and his friends, but they just can't figure out that naked juveniles are probably victims, I guess. And so they are re-victimizing these survivors. Worse, the included images and videos seized. Some were commercial porn. However, some allegedly were taken by Epstein himself or other individuals that we have no information on. And the DOJ did admit to including large quantities of this imagery, but they claim they redacted anything depicting child sex abuse materials and treated all women in them as victims, but that honestly is not true. Sorry, this is kind of a sore subject for me and it makes me kind of sad. So critics, NPR's Ryan Lucas has been really outspoken on this. Pointed out that the unredacted victim photos in the dumps, and in one case, the survivor's name was visible, while Epstein's was blacked out. So the FBI and the FBI agents and the so-called line prosecutors from the Department of Justice, whoever is doing this sloppy redaction, it's a joke. Just flat out. They're not redacting the victims, they're redacting the predators. And it's not hyperbole. If these unredacted images show minors naked with grown men, as the grand jury transcripts state, that's the definition of disseminating child pornography. Federal law 18 USC 2252 makes it a felony to knowingly distribute child sexual abuse materials, or CSAM. And the DOJ of all agencies should know better. They even had to pull down thousands of files after the initial drop in these images just because of these unredacted photos and the ages and the fact that you could see exactly who it was. It's not a mistake. It's not being sloppy. I almost feel like it was intentional, but I can't prove that either. Um, and while the victims were hung out to dry, powerful names like Trump's were heavily redacted. As even though we got a lot in those FBI 303s that had Trump's name, although they're starting to scrub those now too, they were redacted pretty heavily in other spots, which is not okay. His face was even blacked out in news articles and magazine articles, and some of those didn't even have anything to do with the Epstein files or with child sex trafficking. They just had redacted Trump. And his mentions, I mean, like thousands of them, were sometimes obscured despite the law requiring transparency. Their Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche insists that they're not working or trying to cover up for Donald Trump. And on that, I call bullshit. Flat out. I guess maybe Todd Blanche thinks we're idiots because I listen to how he talks, and I am so tired of his doublespeak and his gaslighting. He is as criminal, if not more so, than Donald Trump. Donald Trump never had morals, integrity, or ethics. So when it comes to being guilty under those circumstances, I don't know how you work that out. But as far as Todd Blanche, at one time he was a principled attorney. He used to do a good job, and somehow he's turned into sycophant extraordinaire, and all he does is lie and gaslight and cover up for his orange god king, the Mango Mussolini himself, the angry orange Donald J. Trump. Anyway, Thomas Massey and Ro Khanna have come out and publicly stated that they feel that these redactions are outrageous and questioning if the other half of the 6 million documents are being held illegally, which they are. Because there is no list. You've got to prove that they are national security threats. And you don't just get to make stuff up because the judge would be able to look at it. So think about it. The law that Trump signed that demands minimal redactions to expose the truth and requires full transparency. Well, instead, the DOJ over-redacted the elites and under-redacted victims. That's not following the law. That is flat out defying it because they can. Anyway, what that implies, it's not just a bureaucratic oops, it's systemic failure with massive consequences. Number one, they're re-traumatizing the victims. These women have been through enough. They have waited years for their justice and to tell their story because there was no one there to help them when they were small girls. And now Donald Trump victimized them then, and he's victimizing them now. And that's not okay. Decades they've been fighting for justice, and look at where we are. The second implication is erosion of trust in the justice system. And I'll be frankly honest with you. We have an illegitimate Supreme Court. They're crap. The Justice Department is a freaking joke. They're not going to be able to convict anything because the entire country knows they're a joke. They are, and they are so weaponized, it's ridiculous. And Todd Blanche the other day on the Sunday program saying that if you work at the DOJ, your job is to follow Trump's agenda or his priorities or however you put it. No, That is not the role of the Department of Justice. That is supposed to be an independent agency prosecuting crime without fear or favor and following the evidence wherever it leads, even if it hits someone on your own side. But the Republicans can't handle that. And number 3 is protecting the powerful. You know, why redact Trump and his face and his clips that we already know he's in? That took 2 seconds to figure out what was going on. But you leave a victim's name and face intact when they're nude with a grown man? The law prohibits withholding non-victim info. So it implies a 2-tiered system is what doing that does. One for elites, just like Trump, and one for vulnerable survivors that are getting thrown under the bus by our damn DOJ because they're awful people. It fuels theories that the DOJ is covering up for Trump and his cronies, and well, they are. I don't think any of us need this big giant, thing to tell us what to do. But yeah, they are at this point. And how serious is the DOJ about following Trump's law? They're not. They're not. They think it's a joke. That's how they treat it. That's how they're going to continue to treat it. So here we are. So what can we do? We need to demand accountability every day. Keep talking about the Epstein files. Don't let them get hidden. Don't let them get buried, because they would like nothing more than for that to be the very thing that happens. They want it to get buried. And that's really sad. But that is where we are. That is what they want to do. And so we need to hold them accountable. Contact your reps. Call until your fingers bleed if you have to. Push for the full, proper releases and investigations that should occur. When you've got the DOJ saying, even with what came out in this last dump, that there will be no other prosecutions, really? So if the one is true about the 13-year-old Donald Trump, that little thing about like trying to eat a carrot, just with putting the whole thing in your mouth first, before you chew, and getting hit in the head by Trump because you did chew on your carrot. They're not going to investigate. Them saying that anything about Trump is sensational, it's obviously not true. It came out around the elections. I find that deplorable and disgusting. That is not what I want my taxpayers going to. Is to wherever they want to put it. That's not okay. Do their damn job, and we've got to demand it. And we need to tell our representatives they need to investigate and hold the DOJ responsible for their mishandling of this case and of these documents. Share this video to spread awareness. I know they're not very good yet, but I'll try and get them there. But do share the video, get it out there. And support survivors groups like the Epstein Victims Compensation Fund. It's how a lot of them get the money to retain their attorneys and to travel, because this has affected a lot of them, and some of them, are never going to be the way they were the day before they met Jeffrey Epstein. Anyway, excuse me. In closing, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And that's where we are with this regime and this DOJ. The DOJ's release did not honor Donald Trump's law. It mocked it. And the real answer, the victims deserve better. The American people deserve better. And so we need to hold them accountable. We cannot allow authoritarian fascists to take over our country and think they can gaslight us and tell us not to believe our lying eyes. So if you found this compelling, please, if you would, I don't ask for anything, just please subscribe to help me move up in the algorithm a little bit. I am a brand new channel. Oh, and for the upside good news, I did spend the money to buy a iPhone vlogging YouTube kit. So I'll have better lighting and a better camera. It won't come until Wednesday, and I can't totally wait that long to put out content. So you don't have to see this screwy Zoom thing for much longer. But thank you for coming. And again, I'm Brittany with Liberty Beats, and you guys have a blessed evening. Bye.